What do you see when you look in a mirror? Not just the surface, the familiar lines, the tired eyes, the practiced smile, but deeper, beyond a reflection, into the flicker of something you can't quite name. There's a moment, brief and unsettling, when a light shifts and your own gaze seems to look back at you with a question. What if the thing you fear most isn't your failure, but your own potential? History is littered with stories of those who stood on the edge of greatness, only to step back. The artist who burned their own masterpiece. The scientist who hid their discovery. The leader who chose silence over revolution. We tell ourselves these are tales of caution, of humility, of knowing one's limits. But what if there's something else? What if there are warnings about the terror that comes with possibility? In ancient myths, the gods punished mortals who dared to reach too high. Icarus, flying too close to the sun. Prometheus, stealing fire for humanity. But the real punishment was not from the gods. It was from within. A deep, primal fear that to become more than we are is to risk everything we know. Why do we sabotage our own progress? Why do we choose comfort over transformation, even when we know what we could become? Is it because somewhere in the darkness of our minds, we sense that to unlock our true potential, we must first confront the parts of ourselves we'd rather keep hidden? Carl Jung called this the shadow, the unknown, often unwanted side of our psyche. Tonight, we step into that shadow, not to escape it, but to understand it. Because the greatest journey you will ever take is not out into the world, but inward, into the depths of your own possibility and the darkness that guards it. Are you ready to look in the mirror and see what's really there? Throughout history, the world has been shaped not only by those who dared to reach for greatness, but also by the invisible forces that pulled them back. The myth of Icarus is more than a warning about arrogance. It is a parable about the terror of possibility. Icarus, given wings of wax and feather, is told not to fly too high. The sun, he is warned, will melt his wings. But the real lesson is not about the sun. It is about the fear that lives in the heart of every dreamer. The fear that soaring too high will bring consequences we cannot control. Prometheus, too, is punished not for his crime, but for his audacity. He brings fire, knowledge, power, the spark of creation, to humanity. For this, he is chained to a rock, his liver devoured each day. The message is clear. Those who bring light into darkness must pay a price. But why? Why do we, as individuals and as societies, recoil from those who push boundaries? Why do we so often turn on those who show us what we could become? Consider Galileo, who dared to look through a telescope and see the universe as it truly is. His discoveries threatened the order of his time, not just because they challenged authority, but because they forced people to confront a new reality, one in which the earth was not the center and humanity was not the measure of all things. Galileo was silenced, not only by the church, but by the collective anxiety of a society unprepared to face its own insignificance and its own potential for greatness. This pattern repeats itself again and again. The whistleblower who exposes corruption, only to be exiled or destroyed. The revolutionary who inspires hope, only to be betrayed by those they sought to liberate. The artist whose vision is too raw, too honest, too unsettling for the world to accept. It is easy to blame institutions, to point to governments, religions, or corporations as the suppressors of human potential. But the truth is more unsettling. The fear is not just external. It is internalized, woven into the fabric of our collective psyche. We fear what we might become, because to become more is to leave behind the safety of what we know. To embrace our potential is to step into the unknown, to risk chaos, to accept responsibility for the consequences of our own power. Societies create myths, laws, and taboos not only to protect themselves from danger, but to protect themselves from the terror of transformation. We punish the Prometheuses and Galileos of the world not just to maintain order, but to avoid the mirror they hold up to us, a mirror that shows us what we could be if only we dared. In every age, The greatest threat is not the enemy outside, but the possibility within. The paradox of history is that we long for greatness, yet fear the cost of achieving it. And so, time and again, we choose the comfort of limitation over the uncertainty of potential. But what if the true danger is not in reaching too far, but in never reaching at all? Carl Jung once wrote, "Everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is embodied in the individual's conscious life, the blacker and denser it is." But what is this shadow? It is not a ghost, nor a demon lurking in the darkness. It is a part of you, an invisible twin, following you everywhere, whispering from the corners of your mind. The shadow, as Jung described it, is the sum of all the parts of ourselves we deny, repress, or refuse to acknowledge. It is the anger we swallow, the envy we hide, the desires we pretend not to feel. It is every impulse that doesn't fit the image we want to present to the world. But the shadow is not just a collection of vices. It is also the birthplace of our greatest strengths. Within the shadow lies creativity, ambition, and the raw energy of life itself. Untamed, unfiltered, and often misunderstood. How does the shadow form? From childhood, we are taught what is acceptable and what is not. We learn to smile when we want to scream, to obey when we want to rebel, to fit in when we long to stand out. Every time we hide a part of ourselves to gain approval or avoid punishment, that part slips into the shadow. Over time, the shadow grows, fed by everything we refuse to see. But the shadow does not disappear. It waits, just beneath the surface, shaping our thoughts, our choices, our fears. It is the reason we lash out in anger when we feel threatened, or sabotage our own success when we get too close to what we want. It is the voice that whispers, "You're not good enough," even as we strive for more. Jung believed that confronting the shadow is essential for true growth. But this confrontation is not easy. To face the shadow is to look into the mirror and see not only what you love about yourself, but everything you fear, everything you hate, everything you wish you could forget. It is to admit that you are capable of cruelty as well as kindness, of cowardice as well as courage. Why is this so terrifying? Because the shadow is the unknown within ourselves. It is the part of us that does not obey the rules, that threatens the fragile order we have built in our minds. To acknowledge the shadow is to accept that we are not who we pretend to be. It is to risk losing the comfort of certainty and to step into the chaos of possibility. Yet, Jung argued, the shadow is not our enemy. It is a source of power waiting to be integrated. The artist who channels their pain into beauty, the leader who transforms their rage into justice, the ordinary person who finds courage in their darkest hour, all have made peace with their shadow. The fear of our own potential, then, is not just a fear of failure or success. It is a fear of the unknown within ourselves. A fear that, if we open the door to the shadow, we will be consumed by it. But Jung insisted that only by facing the monster within can we become whole. Only by embracing the shadow can we unlock the full spectrum of our humanity. The journey into the shadow is not a descent into madness, but a path to integration. It is the hero's journey, not to slay the dragon, but to befriend it, to claim the treasure hidden in the darkness, and return to the world transformed. This is the challenge Jung set before us, to meet the monster within and discover that it is in fact ourselves. If the shadow is the hidden force within us, then self-sabotage is its most cunning disguise. It is the quiet voice that tells you to wait until tomorrow, the sudden fatigue that strikes when opportunity knocks, the inexplicable urge to turn away just as the door to your dreams begins to open. Why do we do this to ourselves? Why, when faced with the chance to become more, do we so often choose less? Psychologists call it self-sabotage, a pattern of behavior that undermines our own goals and desires. It can take many forms: procrastination, perfectionism, chronic indecision, or even outright self-destruction. But beneath these habits lies a deeper truth. We are not simply lazy or unmotivated. We are afraid. Imposter syndrome is one of the most common masks of this fear. It is the persistent belief that we are frauds, that our achievements are accidents, and that sooner or later we will be exposed. No matter how much evidence we gather to the contrary, the feeling lingers. I don't deserve this. I'm not ready. I'm not enough. But there is another, more subtle fear, the fear of success. To succeed is to change, to step into a new identity, to accept new responsibilities. It is to risk the loss of old comforts, old relationships, old certainties. The mind, sensing this threat, creates barriers, internal critics, doubts, distractions, to keep us safe from the unknown. Jung saw this as the shadow's way of protecting us from the anxiety of transformation. The parts of ourselves we have buried, our ambition, our creativity, our desire for greatness, are not gone. They're simply locked away, guarded by the fear that to unleash them would be to lose control. Consider the moments you have turned down an opportunity, not because you couldn't do it, but because you were afraid of what would happen if you did. The times you procrastinated, not out of laziness, but out of terror that your best effort might actually succeed. And then what? Who would you become if you stopped holding yourself back? Self-sabotage is not a flaw. It is a defense mechanism, a way of keeping the world predictable, the self-familiar. But it is also a prison, built from the very fears we refuse to face. So ask yourself, what would happen if you stop holding yourself back? What might you become if you dare to step beyond the limits you have set for yourself? Step back for a moment and look beyond the individual. What if the fear of our own potential is not just a personal struggle, but a collective one? Carl Jung believed that just as each person has a shadow, so too does society, a collective unconscious shaped by centuries of shared fears, desires, and taboos. Societies, like individuals, are built on stories. Stories about what is possible, what is forbidden, what is celebrated, and what is condemned. From the earliest myths to the latest headlines, these stories shape the boundaries of our imagination. They tell us who we are allowed to be and who we must never become. Throughout history, those who have threatened these boundaries have often paid a heavy price. Visionaries and dissenters are not just ignored. They are persecuted, ridiculed, or erased. Galileo was forced to recant his discoveries. Socrates was sentenced to death for corrupting the youth with dangerous ideas. Even in modern times, whistleblowers and reformers are often ostracized, their reputations destroyed by the very institutions they sought to improve. Why does this happen? Because radical self-actualization, whether in an individual or a society, threatens the status quo. It disrupts the delicate balance of power, challenges the comfort of conformity, and exposes the collective shadow, the hidden fears and insecurities that bind a culture together. Social norms, propaganda, and media manipulation are the tools by which societies enforce these boundaries. They glorify mediocrity, reward obedience, and demonize those who dare to stand out. The message is clear. Do not reach too high. Do not question too much. Do not become more than you are told to be. Consider the subtle ways this plays out in everyday life. The student who is mocked for being too smart. The artist who is told their work is too strange. The activist who is labeled dangerous for demanding change. These are not just isolated incidents. They are symptoms of a deeper collective anxiety. Jung called this the collective shadow, the sum of all the fears, prejudices, and unspoken rules that keep a society from evolving. It is the reason why revolutions are so often followed by periods of repression, why new ideas are met with suspicion, and why true innovation is so rare. But the most insidious effect of the collective shadow is the way it seeps into our own minds. We internalize the limits imposed by society, mistaking them for our own. We censor ourselves before anyone else can. We shrink from our potential, not because we lack ambition, but because we have inherited a fear of change. So ask yourself, how much of your self-doubt is truly yours? How many of your limitations are echoes of a society that fears what you might become? To confront the collective shadow is to challenge not only the world around you, but the world within you. It is to recognize that the boundaries of possibility are not fixed. They are chosen, reinforced, and ultimately breakable. The question is, will you accept the limits handed down to you, or will you dare to imagine something more? In the digital age, the shadow has found new ways to reveal itself and to hide. The internet, once hailed as a tool for liberation and self-expression, has become a double-edged sword. It offers us the promise of connection, knowledge, and limitless possibility. But it also exposes us to a new kind of darkness, one that is both collective and deeply personal. Social media platforms invite us to curate our identities, to present only the best, brightest, and most acceptable versions of ourselves. But beneath the surface, the shadow festers. Every like, every comment, every share is a subtle negotiation with our own insecurities. We compare, we compete, we conform. The fear of standing out, of being different, is amplified by the ever-watchful eyes of the digital crowd. Surveillance is no longer the domain of governments alone. Algorithms track our every move, predicting our desires, shaping our choices, and feeding us content designed to keep us comfortable and compliant. The digital world knows our fears, our weaknesses, our secret longings. It uses them not to help us grow, but to keep us scrolling, buying, and believing. Echo chambers form, reinforcing our biases and shielding us from uncomfortable truths. The internet, instead of expanding our horizons, can shrink them, trapping us in cycles of outrage, envy, and self-doubt. The shadow is no longer hidden in the depths of the unconscious. It is broadcast, shared, and monetized. But the digital age also magnifies our potential. Ideas can spread in an instant. Movements can rise from a single post. Voices once silenced can find an audience, and the boundaries of possibility can be redrawn overnight. Yet, with this power comes a new kind of fear. The fear of being truly seen, of being judged, of failing in public. The stakes are higher, the risks more visible, the consequences more immediate. In this world, the shadow is more visible and more dangerous than ever before. It is no longer enough to confront the darkness within ourselves. We must also navigate the shadows cast by the digital world around us. The question is, will you let the algorithms define your limits, or will you use the tools of the digital age to break free from them? In a world where the shadow is everywhere, the challenge is not just to see it, but to choose what you will do with it. If the shadow is the part of ourselves we fear, then confronting it is the act of reclaiming our wholeness. Carl Jung believed that the journey toward our true potential does not begin with the pursuit of perfection, but with the acceptance of imperfection. It is not about becoming flawless, but about becoming real, embracing both the light and the darkness within. To confront the shadow is to step into the unknown, to face the parts of ourselves we have spent a lifetime avoiding. It is to look honestly at our anger, our envy, our ambition, our pain, and to recognize that these are not enemies, but messengers. They're signals from the depths of our psyche, pointing us toward the places where we have room to grow. Jung called this process integration. It is the act of bringing the shadow into the light of consciousness, of making peace with what we have denied. This is not a one-time event, but a lifelong journey, a spiral that leads us deeper into ourselves and higher toward our potential. How do we begin this journey? The first step is self-reflection, to sit with our thoughts and feelings without judgment or distraction, to ask ourselves difficult questions. What am I afraid of? What parts of myself do I hide from others? What dreams have I abandoned out of fear? The second step is creative expression. Art, music, writing, movement. These are ways to give voice to the shadow, to let it speak in a language beyond words. When we create, we allow the unconscious to surface, to be seen and heard. In this space, the shadow is transformed from a source of fear into a wellspring of inspiration. The third step is the courage to face discomfort. Growth is never easy. It requires us to move beyond the familiar, to risk failure, rejection, and pain. But every time we choose courage over comfort, we reclaim a piece of ourselves that was lost to fear. Modern psychology echoes Jung's insights. Therapists speak of shadow work, the practice of exploring our hidden motives, patterns, and wounds. Research shows that those who are willing to confront their fears, rather than avoid them, are more resilient, creative, and fulfilled. The path to true potential is not a straight line. It is a dance between light and dark, certainty and doubt, hope and fear. But each step we take toward integration brings us closer to wholeness. So, the next time you feel fear rising within you, do not turn away. See it for what it is, a signpost pointing toward the edge of your comfort zone and the beginning of your transformation. Your shadow is not your enemy. It is your guide. To embrace, it is to unlock the full spectrum of your humanity, and to discover that your greatest potential lies not in what you hide, but in what you are brave enough to face. Human potential is a paradox, a force capable of both breathtaking creation and unimaginable destruction. Within the same mind that dreams of beauty, progress, and connection, there also lurks the capacity for chaos, violence, and ruin. Carl Jung warned that the shadow is not merely a vault of darkness, but a reservoir of raw energy, energy that can be shaped into greatness or catastrophe. History is filled with figures who have stood at this crossroads. The scientist who unlocks the secrets of the atom, only to see that knowledge transformed into weapons of mass destruction. The revolutionary who inspires hope and change, but whose movement spirals into tyranny and bloodshed. The artist whose vision reshapes culture, yet whose genius teeters on the edge of madness. Consider the story of nuclear technology. Born from the minds of brilliant physicists, it promised a new era of energy and possibility. But in the shadows of that promise, the mushroom cloud rose, a symbol of both human ingenuity and the terrifying consequences of unchecked power. The same potential that can heal can also destroy. This is the double-edged sword of human potential. To unleash it is to accept responsibility for its consequences. To wield it wisely requires not only ambition, but self-awareness, a willingness to confront the shadow and understand the motives that drive us. Jung believed that the more we deny our shadow, the more likely it is to erupt in destructive ways. When we refuse to acknowledge our darker impulses, they find expression in the world around us, through violence, oppression, or the abuse of power. But when we integrate the shadow, we gain the ability to channel our energy toward creation rather than destruction. The question is not whether we have the power to change the world. We do. The question is whether we are prepared to face the full spectrum of our own nature and to use our potential with wisdom and humility. So, if you could change the world, would you trust yourself to do it wisely? Would you dare to confront not only your dreams, but your demons? For in the end, the fate of our world depends not just on what we can do, but on who we choose to become. Every culture, across every age, has told the story of the hero's journey. A call to adventure, a crossing of thresholds, a descent into darkness, and a return, changed, awakened, whole. Carl Jung saw this myth not just as a story, but as a map of the human soul. Joseph Campbell called it the monomyth, the universal pattern that underlies all great tales of transformation. But what if this journey is not just for ancient heroes and legendary figures? What if it is the story of your life, unfolding in real time? The journey begins with a call, a whisper from the depths of your being, urging you to step beyond the familiar. It might come as a crisis, a longing, or a sudden realization that the life you are living is too small for the person you could become. To answer this call is to leave the safety of the known and venture into the wilderness of the self. Along the way, you encounter trials and temptations. You face doubts, fears, and the ever-present shadow. There are moments of failure, betrayal, and loss. But each challenge is a test, a chance to discover strengths you never knew you had. The descent into darkness is inevitable. It is here in the depths that you confront the parts of yourself you have denied, the wounds, the fears, the hidden desires. This is the crucible of transformation, where the old self is stripped away and something new is forged.